Are you ready? Let's rock this thing. My name is Lizzie. It's time to get busy. Turn to Ruth 1-1 and we'll rap till she's done. Naomi and her brood needed more food. Went to Moab, they fled. Hubby ended up dead. Then her sons died too. What's a mother to do? Their wives were both heathen, but at least they were breathing. Naomi started pining. Pretty soon she was whining. We've been there, baby, and I don't mean maybe. The women hit the road, their grief a heavy load. We beat Orpah, turned back. Loyal Ruth stayed on track. I'm with you, said Ruth, and with God, that's the truth. Naomi's words spent, back to Bethlehem they went. Look us home, said the sisters, and without their misters, a decade full of sorrow. Still there's hope for tomorrow. You may call Naomi bitter, but she ain't no quitter. Not with Ruth beside her and the Lord to guide her. Ruth went to glean barley, didn't ride no Harley. She walked the whole way and worked the whole day. Then Boaz came along, both wealthy and strong. Whose maiden is she? Is she married? Wondered he. Now listen, my daughter, you can drink my water. Hang as close as you can and watch those men. Righteous Ruth bowed down with her face to the ground. What mercy she did cry, but I can't imagine why. You're a stand-up homie taking care of Naomi. Well, you just try and rhyme Naomi. May you find a rich reward staying close to the Lord. Sit with me, he said at dinner. Boaz knew he had a winner. Ruth gleaned without flack, then she took home a sack. One day Naomi told her, sprinkle perfume on your shoulder, put on your girly clothes, but forget the pantyhose. Well, they didn't have pantyhose back then, you know. Ruth headed out the door, bound for the threshing floor. She watched and she waited while her breath was bated. Ruth had to find out, is he hero or lout? So she laid at his feet, that they smelled real sweet. Who are you? Said he. I am Ruth, answered she. Kindly share your blankie and we'll skip the hanky-panky. Oh, Boaz was excited. Yes, indeed, he was delighted. If we're talking virtue-wise, young Ruthie took the prize. Didn't want to burst her bubble, but there was a little trouble. Some no-name schemer had the right to redeem her. She lay by her hero's side, safe and comfy as a bride, then went home to MIL, where they had to sit a spell. Boaz faced the elder fellow, acting cool and mellow. When the deal was said and done, Boaz was the dude who won. Then Ruth became his missus. Bet he showered her with kisses. When he cried, oh, bed, she was glad they were wed. All the men shouted glory. You fit right into our story. Then the women named the child. Don't you know Naomi smiled? It was a happy ever after filled with pain and laughter, stood the lengthy test of time and survived my crazy rhyme. See, the girl still got it, which is why I taught it. If you like what you've heard, you will find it in the Word. God spread this whole jam between Judges and 1 Sam. As for now, it's a wrap. Go ahead, you can clap.
Well, Bible teacher Liz Curtis Higgs gives us an overview of the entire book of Ruth in her rap. Now, Liz also has a book about the Old Testament book of Ruth entitled The Girls Still Got It. And some of the sermon material in this series is from that book. And I think Tammy Wire's going to have that book available, The Girls Still Got It, at the Bibles, Books, and Resources, which is in 2 weeks. I contacted Liz Curtis Higgs several months ago asking if she would care to do a Zoom call with me and talk about the Old Testament book of Ruth and her book about Ruth. But due to the demands on her schedule for speaking and writing, she had to decline, which I certainly totally understand. But I want to approach chapter 3 3 of the book of Ruth, much like I did chapter 2 last week. I want to think of it somewhat like a TV show, and this being its 3rd episode, which is actually probably about the most exciting episode of the 4. How many of you remember the TV show The Love Boat? Remember The Love Boat? That'll tell your age. It was a romantic comedy drama that aired from 1977 to 1986 in 250 episodes. The series revolved around the ship's captain, Meryl Steubing, played by Gavin MacLeod, and a handful of her crew with passengers played by guest actors for each episode. And they had these romantic and these humorous adventures. The Love Boat was a Saturday night staple for many households. Now, there were times that back in the 70s and 80s, it was even considered a little bit risque. But compared to many TV shows on today, it was actually quite tame. One of the interesting tidbits about one of the actors of the show Love Boat is regarding Fred Grandy, who maybe you remember, he portrayed your yeoman purser, Gopher Smith. Oh, Grandy served in the U.S. House of Representatives for his home state of Iowa from 1987 to 1995. He also ran for the Republican primary for governor in the state of Iowa in 1994, but he lost that election. I always kind of liked his character in the show Love Boat. He is a little bit goofy. He was always very lighthearted. But we're going to see this 3rd episode of Ruth, and to some, it might come across a bit risque. There are a lot of innuendos in Ruth chapter 3. Some of them may be true, some of them may be exaggerated, and some just really aren't appropriately understood in our culture today compared to theirs. But the 3 main characters remain unchanged from last week's episode. There is Naomi, her daughter-in-law Ruth, and then Boaz, who we met last week. Ruth, obviously, is the namesake of the show. Naomi is going to continue to play a supportive role, but it's Boaz we're going to see again coming to the forefront today. Now, this series we've entitled Ruth, Seeing God's Heart of Love. We're going to see that again today, but we're going to see that love meets deepest needs. So I want you to turn on your mental TVs a little bit like last week, tune in, and let's begin episode 3 of Ruth, Seeing God's Heart of Love. So open your Bibles to Ruth chapter 3 or pull it up on your phones, and let's look at scene 1, which is an unusual suggestion by Naomi. Ruth 3, verse 1. One day, Ruth's mother-in-law, Naomi, said to her, "My daughter, I must find a home for you where you'll be well provided for. Now, Boaz, with whose women you have worked, is a relative of ours. Tonight, he'll be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. Wash, put on perfume, get dressed in your best clothes. Then go down to the threshing floor, but don't let him know you are there until he's finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, note the place where he is lying. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down. He'll tell you what to do." "I'll do whatever you say," Ruth answered. So she went down to the threshing floor and did everything her mother-in-law told her to do. Now, the relationship between Naomi and Ruth is a very close one, even though they did come from different backgrounds and cultures, even though initially they believed differently about God. And all of chapter 3 occurs in one day. The very first 2 words are one day. The suggestion that Naomi gives to Ruth is acted out later that night. So I can kind of imagine Naomi and Ruth are sitting at the breakfast table over their freshly made wheat pancakes, and Naomi is saying, "Ruth, the fellow you met the other day, Boaz, he is distantly related to us, like I mentioned, but I see he's kind of taken a special liking to you." Now, you may remember from last week that Boaz made sure the men did not harass Ruth and that the paid harvesters would leave just a little bit of extra grain in the field so Ruth could find it and pick it up as she followed behind them. So Boaz is playing some little favors here for Ruth. When Barbara and I started dating, she worked the summer between our junior year and our senior year in college at our home church as the office administrator. And I lived about 5 miles away, and most weekdays I would be at her office before she was. I wanted to keep an eye on her, see what was going on. Naomi thinks Ruth needs to make a move towards Boaz to show him her intentions. Naomi is sensing that not only is Boaz already interested in Ruth, but maybe this whole thing is a God-working moment and scenario. So Naomi is now eating her second helping of wheat pancakes, and she knows that just days ago she was very near starvation. Is God in this relocation? Is Boaz a part of God's plan for Ruth's life, meaning also for Naomi's? Now, when chapter 2 ended, we know it was the time of the harvest. And Boaz owned a field, or probably several fields of barley and wheat. And Naomi, originally being from that area, knew that the next step of the harvesting process was the winnowing. Naomi scoots a little closer to Ruth and says, now tonight's the night you need to make your move to show Boaz you want to get to know him better. Naomi knew where Boaz would be. He'd be protecting his harvest of grain during that time. When the grain was harvested, it was time to separate the grain from the chaff. Winnowing is when the grain is tossed into the evening breeze as the day begins to cool, and the wind would scatter the lighter chaff while the valuable grain would fall to the ground. And Bethlehem would have had a community threshing floor where this process would occur. It was usually a smooth circular area of about 50 feet in diameter. People would be coming and going to buy and to sell grain. Boaz would be there to protect his grain through the night, lest some thieves try to make off with it. So Naomi tells Ruth, you wash, you put on perfume, and you get dressed in your best clothes. Now, ladies, if you're getting ready for a date or for an evening out with your husband, you probably typically take a few minutes to make yourself look nice. But Naomi tells Ruth to do something that was not quite that common then. She says, you need to go wash. I want you to understand, in that day, bathing was not a daily routine. It was not even a weekly routine. Most Bible scholars say a bath would occur once a month, maybe once every 2 or 3 months. Now, I want you to think about that. If we all gathered here on a Sunday morning and that was our ritual today, I wouldn't know you were here by your voices. I could smell if you were here or not, and you could smell the same. Now, think about that. Ruth has been gleaning in the field from sunup to sundown. It would be a hot, sunny day. Naomi wanted Boaz not to smell a lady who was all perspiry, but one whose scent was refreshing to him. So Ruth runs down to Bath and Body Works. She grabs a few titillating fragrances and she starts the process. And while she's there at Bath and Body, probably the clerk says to her, would you like to join our Bath of the Month club? We'd love to have you join that. I know the Bible doesn't say that, but it probably ought to. And Naomi gives Ruth 2 instructions about the timing of all this. You wait until after Boaz has had dinner, and then you wait until he's preparing to sleep for the night. Boaz's stomach will be full, and his body will be resting, meaning he'll be much more content. Then Ruth was to lie down next to Boaz and uncover his feet. Now, while the wording here is highly suggestive, I want you to remember that both Boaz and Ruth have openly declared their devotion to God, calling on his power. Now, in a sense, they're being ground like grain and sifted like wheat to see if they will emerge with their honor intact. And that's really the big question and the point of what may actually seem sexually suggestive here. Ruth and Boaz were having their faith tested by the culture in which they lived. Doesn't that happen to us today? Isn't our faith sometimes tested in the culture in which we live? Do we sleep with someone because we can, or do we wait until marriage because we should? Do we abort a baby because the law permits, or do we carry the child because love compels? Do we choose a same-sex partner because we have the right, or do we resist that path because God's word calls it wrong? And it comes down to this: do we please ourselves, or do we really want to please God? Ruth's mother-in-law had such confidence in her that she knew Ruth was going to make the right choice. And while romantic and sexual love are an overall part of God's plan in the context of marriage, love can be expressed in many other ways for another person. Dr. Maxwell Maltz was an American cosmetic surgeon who wrote the book Psycho-Cybernetics. And Maltz wrote about a system of ideas that he claimed could improve one's self-image. But in that book, he relates a story about very remarkable love. A man was injured in a fire while attempting to save his parents from their burning house. And he was unable to rescue his parents, but while trying to rescue them, he burned his face and he was greatly disfigured. And the man interpreted his pain as God's punishment, and he would not allow anyone to see him, including his wife. So she went to Dr. Maltz as a cosmetic surgeon for help, and he assured her he could restore his face cosmetically. But the wife was not very enthused because her husband had refused help so many times before. And she then told Dr. Maltz that the purpose of her visit wasn't to get her husband's face restored, but to have her face disfigured so she could be like him. She told the doctor, if I can share in his pain, then maybe he might let me back into his life. Now, Dr. Maltz denied her request, but he was so moved for her love for her husband, he went to the house, knocked on the man's bedroom door, and said, I'm a plastic surgeon. I want you to know I can restore your face. There was no response. The doctor said, would you please come out? There was no answer. And then Dr. Maltz said, your wife wants me to disfigure her face to make her face like yours in the hope you will let her back into your life. That is how much she loves you. And there was a moment of brief silence, and ever so slowly the doorknob began to turn. What an unusual suggestion by that loving wife. And what an unusual suggestion for Naomi to give to Ruth to begin a relationship with Boaz. Oh, that is scene 1. Scene 2 starts down in verse 7, and it is an unanticipated approach by Ruth. Ruth 3 and verse 7. When Boaz had finished eating and drinking and was in good spirits, he went over to lie down at the far end of the grain pile. Ruth approached quietly, uncovered his feet, and lay down. In the middle of the night, something startled the man. He turned, and there was a woman by his feet. Who are you? He asked. I'm your servant Ruth, she said. Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a guardian redeemer of our family. The Lord bless you, my daughter, he replied. This kindness is greater than that which you showed earlier. You have not run after the younger men, whether rich or poor. And now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for you all you ask. All the people of my town know that you are a woman of noble character. Although it is true that I am a guardian redeemer of our family, there is another who is more closely related than I. Now, when we get to this scene, the TV show would open with us barely being able to probably identify the characters in the dark. Ruth is leaving her house. She has on a dark garment, probably with a hood covering her head. Most of her face is probably covered. She heads to the threshing floor where no one would be allowed to have lanterns, by the way, because a sudden fire could break out. A sudden spark could cause a fire, and it could ruin the harvest of grain and the economy for the entire town in that little village of Bethlehem. You remember that old song, O little town of Bethlehem, how still we see thee lie? Above thy deep and dreamless sleep the silent stars go by. Yet in thy dark street shineth the everlasting light. The hopes and fears of all the years are met in thee tonight. Oh, the light of the world had not yet entered Bethlehem. That's about 1,000 years off here. But on this night, there's going to be the start of a glimmer of that light flickering. So Boaz goes over to his grain pile, which is probably quite large. It'd be for him very lucrative financially. He wants to be close to it. He wants to be sure it's protected through the night for the harvest. Like any small town, Bethlehem would have those who wanted to steal some grain for their own use or to sell to make money. By the way, there's one translation that says, Ruth waits until Boaz starts snoring. Isn't that romantic? Isn't that just the romantic thing there? I snore. My wife says when I have some sinus issues occurring, I really snore. About a year ago, I was having some sinus issues, and I was snoring so much and so loudly that particular night, she could not get to sleep. And so she recorded my snoring, so that the next morning when I got up, she could play it for me. I actually asked her this past week if she still had that recording, and she said, no, it's so obnoxious, I got rid of it, because I was going to play it for you and let you hear it. But it was really obnoxious. Victor Hugo is best known for his work, Les Miserables, but he's also crafted another work that most of us aren't very familiar with. It's entitled originally, Boaz Endormi, or Boaz Slept. It opens, overcome with weariness, he kept to the same rough quarters as before. All day had seen him on the threshing floor, and now by sacks of wheat, tired Boaz slept. Oh, Ruth approaches ever so quietly. She uncovers his feet. She lies down next to him. And you know what his first response was? That was his first response. And Ruth entered early in the night. And when Boaz realizes somebody is next to him, it is the middle of the night. Now, Boaz is tired. He, like Ruth, has been gleaning in the fields and harvesting. He was tired after a long day's work. You know, sometimes men are just very sound sleepers. My wife says somebody could come in our house in the middle of the night, remove me off the bed, lay me in the floor, steal all of our belongings. I would wake up the next morning and say, something happened last night? That's how deeply I usually sleep. But the actions of Ruth, uncovering Boaz's feet and then lying next to him, was really a form of a marriage proposal. Now, we know that not only from the culture of that day, but from one word she uses. Ruth said, I am your servant, Ruth. Now, ladies, don't get bent out of shape here. It's a cultural word. When Ruth used the word servant in chapter 2, it is a different word. In chapter 2, it is the Hebrew word shapha, meaning a helper, meaning a servant who is an assistant. Ruth was helping to glean the fields of Boaz. But here in chapter 3, Ruth uses the word servant here. It's not the same word. It is the Hebrew word amah, and amah means I am available for marriage. By the way, I really love this because Ruth does not ask Boaz to marry her. She tells him to marry her. That's when she says, spread the corner of your garment over me. By the way, that was how he would accept her proposal. That was the significance of that statement. Here's what she said. Buddy, you either seal the deal now or else I'm out of here. That was her proposal to him. Now remember in the previous episode, Boaz already took some special interest in Ruth. He noticed her, and she noticed him noticing her. When I'd been dating Barb for a few months, her roommate just casually walked by me in a hallway between classes one day, and she just pulled me aside and she said, hey, just want to let you know something. If you don't make a move soon, you're going to lose her. You know what I did? I moved. Ruth thought, I'm not waiting on Boaz, so I'll make the move. Now, I'm curious, married folks here, how many of the wives made the proposal for the marriage? If your wife proposed to you, raise your hand. Anybody? Okay, I see one. Anybody else? At least one. All right, very good. You can understand this book of Ruth, Cindy. Very good. It's a beautiful, beautiful outplay of a proposal. Now, later in the Old Testament, the same kind of imagery is used concerning the relationship between God and Israel, that he had a covenant love with them. It is one he would not break, but it's one that Israel would break. Ezekiel 16:8 says, later I passed by, and when I looked at you and saw that you were old enough for love, I spread the corner of my garment over you and covered your naked body. I gave you my solemn oath and entered into a covenant with you, declares the sovereign Lord, and you became mine. It's interesting here that Ruth used the symbolism of covenant love. Remember, Ruth is from Moab. She's not from Judah. But I think in their many long conversations, Naomi told her daughter-in-law about God's love. As they walked that several days' journey from Moab to Bethlehem, they probably chatted quite a bit. Ruth started realizing that Naomi's heart was wanting the best for both of them. Ruth started seeing God through another person. Isn't it true that we see the love of God most often through another person? Sure, it is true that God sometimes works through circumstances, but most often he works through his people. The scene in the middle of the night results in some very intimate conversation between Ruth and Boaz. Now, it's not the kind of intimacy that leads to physical intimacy, but it's the kind that leads to the heart. Boaz calls Ruth daughter. By the way, that's a term of endearment and respect of that day. You may remember in the New Testament, Jesus healed a woman who had an issue of bleeding, and he looked at her and said, daughter, your faith has healed you. I can kind of imagine that Boaz is lightly caressing Ruth's face and saying, this kindness is greater than what you showed earlier. Now, the first kindness Ruth had shown was coming along to Bethlehem with and taking care of her mother-in-law, Naomi. And Boaz knew from that Ruth was already a very special person. And in these revealing moments, Boaz remarks about his own age. You know, typically the female might be more sensitive about getting older and aging, but here it's actually Boaz, because he says, you have not run after the younger men, whether rich or poor. Now, we don't have any idea of the exact age difference, but maybe it's enough. Some scholars say it's enough that Boaz possibly would have been the age of Ruth's father. But the kindness shown here is much deeper than just being a nice person. This isn't the kindness of somebody holding open the door for you at the restaurant. Oh, wasn't he kind to let us go in first? That's not what this is. This is what is called in Hebrew hesed. Hesed is a deep word meaning love between two people. It means having a love with a deep devotion for God. It's also God's love towards us. It is hesed. Often in the Bible, that word is translated mercy. You'll see it a lot, for example, in the New Testament book of Romans. And Boaz is thrilled that Ruth, a younger woman, shares his love for God and knows she could have overlooked him for a much younger man. And while love can help meet many needs, physical and emotional, the one that needs to rise above them all is spiritual. By the way, there is just a funny little thing here. Ruth is the one who proposes, and after she proposes, she can't get a word in edgewise. It's Boaz that's doing all the talking. I don't think he can believe all this. I don't think he can believe all this is happening, and it's happening so quickly. Just hours ago, Ruth was a gleaner in one of his fields, and now she's going to be his wife. But there's one thing they need to address, and that is Boaz is not the only guardian redeemer for Naomi and Ruth. There is a closer relative to Naomi than Boaz, and he's aware of it. Now, the person is never named for us. You know, most TV dramas have a point in which there needs to be a decision of one of the characters, kind of a life-changing decision. Boaz wants to marry Ruth, but there is this other person who in that culture had the first right. John Goldingay, in his commentary on Ruth, writes, in any decent romantic comedy, however, there have to be threats to whether the couple do end up together. Otherwise, the movie will end too quickly. Here, the plot device to maintain suspense is the existence of another kinsman who has the same moral and social obligations as Boaz. So scene 3 is an unexpected delay by Boaz. Now, Boaz didn't really slow down the process to marry Ruth, but he did want to make sure he had all the legal rights so there wouldn't be any issues later. You see, you remember from last week, Boaz was strong physically, he was strong financially, he was strong spiritually, but there's something else about Boaz here. That is, he was strong logistically and practically. He wanted to cross the T's and dot the I's and make sure everything was good and legal like it was supposed to be. Whenever I do a wedding, I'm always a bit fanatical about the wedding license. I always mail it to the court immediately after the wedding ceremony. So if I do a wedding ceremony here at the church at 1:30 on a Saturday afternoon, by 2:30 or 3, that license is in the mail to the courthouse, and I make sure it's signed. And if it's from different counties, sometimes I have to be witnessed by others, make sure all the right people sign it. I've even been known sometimes on a Monday after the wedding, instead of mailing it, just to deliver it to the court personally. And Licking County instructs the officiant of a wedding to sign it and to be the one to send it in. A couple of years ago, I did a wedding, and the groom said he would send in the license. He said, afterwards, if you'll just give that back to me, he said, I will be sure to send it in. And I said, well, actually, if you look at it, it says it's the officiant's responsibility to send it in. I'll take care of that. And he goes, well, I just want to be sure that it gets there. But on the back of it, it reads, if the officiant doesn't get it there in appropriate timing, there's a $500 fine. And I don't care whose wedding I've done, there's no couple worth $500 to me, paying it out of my own money. Now, guys, your bride might be worth $5 billion to you, but she ain't worth $500 to me to not get that done right. And this groom just kept insisting. He's like, I'll let you sign it, and then I will mail it. I called him 2 days before the wedding. I said, here's the deal. If I don't have your license by about 5 o'clock this evening in my office, there is no wedding this Saturday. I had his license later that day. But I did that for this reason. A few years earlier, the probate judge sent a letter to all the clergy in our county about a situation that occurred 25 years earlier where a groom never returned the wedding license, and years later that couple filed for a divorce, discovering that they were never legally married. The judge fined the minister the $500 fee for not returning it and sending in the license on time, and then he told the couple it was now going to cost them thousands of dollars to remedy that situation. In the letter he sent out to the clergy, he told us, he said, to my knowledge, this couple has already spent nearly $25,000 to get this taken care of. So I'm kind of like Boaz when it comes to that. I want to cross the T, I want to dot the I, and that is exactly what Boaz does. Look at verse 13. Stay here for the night. And in the morning, he wants to do his duty as your guardian redeemer. Let him redeem you. But if he is not willing, as surely as the Lord lives, I will do it. Lie here until morning. So she lay at his feet until morning, but got up before anyone could be recognized, and he said, no one must know that a woman came to the threshing floor. He also said, bring me the shawl you are wearing and hold it out. When she did so, he poured into it 6 measures of barley and placed the bundle on her. Then he went back to town. When Ruth came to her mother-in-law, Naomi asked, how did it go, my daughter? Then she told her everything Boaz had done for them and added, he gave me these 6 measures of barley, saying, don't go back to your mother-in-law empty-handed. Then Naomi said, wait, my daughter, until you find out what happens, for the man will not rest until the matter is settled today. So Boaz is initially introduced as a man of standing back in chapter 2. And here Ruth is said that she is a woman of character. These two people who are both godly want to make sure things are done right, that there's no improprieties from either one of them. But notice Boaz says that if there is another redeemer, he can have Ruth if he wants her. Now, by the way the text reads here, Boaz knows who the other redeemer is. And he also knows that the other redeemer won't be willing to pay the price for Ruth. And when Boaz first met Ruth, he protected her. And now he's doing it again by having her stay through the night. Because for her to leave in the middle of the night would not only ruin her reputation, it would endanger her life physically. Because there would be thieves and robbers out roaming the streets of Bethlehem. I want you to remember that Bethlehem was a poor village. Lots of poor people lived there. And when desperate enough, there are some who will rob from others and who will attack others. Even the Holy Land has some issues today. When I was in Jerusalem back in November 2017, we were warned primarily about 2 areas, the Mount of Olives overlooking the city of Jerusalem, and then near the tomb of Jesus. Both places have a lot of people hanging around who will ask for handouts, but who will also attack you. As we were leaving the tomb of Jesus, our guide told us, wait until all 28 of us get on the bus together or get to the gate together and then walk out to the bus together. Because he said the last couple of times, a couple of people went onto the bus early just to get there on their own. And he said both of them got robbed of their purses and their cell phones. Boaz is being both a protector and a provider for Ruth. He gives her 6 big scoops of barley to take home. Now, in the Bible, the number 7 is known as that of completion, of fulfillment. But Boaz isn't finished yet. He hasn't redeemed her. There's still one more step. And the grain Boaz gives to Ruth to take home is a gift this time. You remember, Ruth had not gleaned this grain like the grain she had received in chapter 2. This grain in chapter 3 is a generous expression of love from Boaz. It was for both Ruth an emotional gift and a practical one. Due to my role here, I have the opportunity occasionally to go to somebody and give them money to help them. And I'm able to tell them there are some generous people who have made this gift possible. And a lot of times there are tears of gratitude because the gift is both an emotional one and a practical one to help somebody who needs it at the time. But there's another practicality to this gift of grain. If someone would stop her as she's leaving the threshing floor in the early hours of the morning, she could just hold out her shawl and say, see all this grain? All I did was come to get breakfast. See, Boaz was protecting Ruth's reputation. And he's also providing for Naomi with that generous portion of grain. I'm guessing there's going to be more pancakes for breakfast for these 2 ladies. And when Ruth returns home and Naomi inquires as to what happened, Ruth shows her all the grain she's given and then is told by mother-in-law, wait, if Boaz is the person I think he He's going to settle everything today. You're going to know within hours if you're going to be his wife. So that is where episode 3 ends, and you have to come back next week for episode 4. But here's the one lesson to take home with you. Sometimes faith is learning to wait while God orchestrates. Sometimes faith is learning to wait while God orchestrates. Even for the person that needs to cross the T's and dot the I's, it means sometimes sitting tight while God does his part. He may need to complete the alphabet. We sometimes want to know how the story ends, but we're missing the story that we're in the middle of itself. Ruth was only going to have to wait until later that day to find out the conclusion. And God's heart of love knows what we need the most, and he often provides what it is, but sometimes we have to wait and learn that that is our deepest need of the moment. All of this third episode is leading to the point of waiting. There's a lot of fast-paced action in episode 3. Naomi tells Ruth to take a bath, show up unannounced in the middle of the night to meet Boaz. Ruth does that, proposes marriage to Boaz. Boaz and Ruth have a very loving conversation as the depth of their relationship begins to develop. Boaz assures Ruth everything's going to work out, but now there's a slowdown in the action. By the way, the last time Ruth speaks in her own book is right here. And she speaks of her concern for her mother-in-law, and her first words were the very same. And so from chapter 3 to chapter 4, Ruth will wait while God orchestrates. Ruth and Naomi were not sure how long they'd have to wait on that side of the story. Would it be minutes? Would it be hours? Would it be days? Would it be weeks? Would it even be months? What about you? Is there something for which you're waiting on God right now? Are you praying and waiting for an answer patiently, or maybe not so patiently? Psalm 130, verse 5, I wait for the Lord, my whole being waits, and in his word I put my hope. Psalm 38:15, Lord, I wait for you. You will answer, Lord my God. See, there are two types of waiting, active and passive. Ruth experienced both. When she was gleaning from Boaz's field, she was actively waiting, doing what she could. But here at the end of chapter 3, she's passively waiting. She's done all she can do. Now she's got to wait on others and God. Passive waiting is a lot more difficult, isn't it? Passive waiting is hard. Now, just a couple of things about waiting on God. One is waiting on God always has value and purpose. God does not make us wait to punish us, but to allow circumstances and ourselves to be prepared for his good and our ultimate good. God's idea of goodness is not what happens to us here, but what prepares us for eternity with him. That's why many people love that verse, Romans 8:28, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who've been called according to his purpose. But the good that Paul's talking about there isn't the good in this world. It's about the good in eternity that God's preparing for us. And the second thing about waiting, when waiting on God, he's still with you. You never wait alone. And if you're in a season of waiting right now, it can be difficult. Maybe your season of waiting has already lasted longer than a few weeks or a few months. Maybe it's even been years. And maybe it's only for one reason, to know God better. Because his love is the deepest need we all have. And if you've not yet allowed God's love to move you to a decision for Christ, it's then time for you to quit waiting and actively move. And so if you need to accept Christ and be baptized into him, when we dismiss the service in a little bit, you can come to the front when the service ends, or you can bring membership to the church. I'll be up here near the baptistry area. But we're going to prepare our hearts to take communion because we have been redeemed by the blood of Jesus Christ, and we need not wait on our Redeemer. Let's pray. Father, as we prepare our hearts and minds for your expression of love from the cross of Jesus, may we remember that Jesus became our kinsman redeemer to pay the price for all our sins. And so we thank you for who he is and that he is willing to always meet our deepest need of love. For it's in his name we pray. Amen.